Hello everybody, this is Gregory of 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to retort to the idea that the Bible supports slavery, Christianity supports slavery, and in particular the Catholic Church supports slavery. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri, Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. I'm going to try to make this episode pretty quickly because we do have an episode retorting to the mission system, how the church put all the Indians in missions and how this is horrifically bad. So I don't want to cover a lot of stuff, so I'm going to just try to do bullet by bullet points. The Catholic Church does not support slavery, and really the Bible doesn't necessarily support slavery. The Israelites were slaves. They were slaves themselves. And it was understood throughout salvation history, as we see in the Old Testament. Was there slavery? Yes. But it was a progression. See, God had to meet these people where they were at the time. You can say the same thing about polygamy and having handmaids as your second wife, essentially, like Jacob did. And then if you look at the Old Testament from the beginning, from Genesis to the time of the New Testament, by that point, through God's revelation, Christ in Matthew 19 says, it's one man and one married, and as long as they are one man and one woman, as long as they are married forever. So it's as long as they're alive, they're married forever. So it's kind of the same thing with slavery, that you definitely see slavery early on, and you can certainly see it how people had chattel slavery. But the understanding was, as God liberated the Israelites, the understanding was, you are not going to enslave people because you yourself were enslaved. Now, as we go through time, and certainly you can see in the New Testament, and there's actually a book in the New Testament that deals with slavery. If you look at Paul's letter to Philemon and Onesimus, Philemon is an owner of a slave. Of course, the ancient Romans had slaves. And essentially, we have a treatment on this. So Onesimus stole something allegedly from Philemon, and so Paul's writing a letter saying, hey, you need to forgive this guy. And since he is now a Christian, he's following the way, he's a Christian, there is no more separation. You are master, he is slave. We are all in the same body of Christ, free or slave, Gentile or Jew, and you must treat him with that kind of respect. Now understand, Paul in his time could not obliterate Roman slavery. And in fact, nobody could obliterate Roman slavery. Paul was against slavery. But there's nothing that Paul could have done or the early church could have done to eradicate slavery because it was so ingrained in Roman culture. And in fact, it's ingrained in every culture. No matter where you are in the world and in what century, slavery abounded. Why? Because slavery is a consequence of sin. Men and women are human, and there's going to be the wheats with the weeds. And so if you look, we've always had slavery. We still have it today, especially in Muslim countries. We might rename it and call it different things like child sex trafficking and other things like that. But you can go to Libya, you can go to some sub-Saharan African countries, and they're still practicing slavery. So it's still around. The other thing I want to say really quickly is no institution has done more to vocally champion the end of slavery than the Catholic Church. Going back to even Pope Eugenius IV in the 1440s proclaimed that any Catholic that owned slaves would be automatically excommunicated. You saw Paul III re-echo this in the 1530s. And there's over and over pronouncements from various popes condemning slavery. Not to mention we have the Dominicans, we have the Franciscans, Bartholomew de las Casas. He was a big champion of Indian rights in the New World. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Now, were there Catholics that owned slaves in the last 1,000 years, certainly since the Age of Exploration? Absolutely. But it's just like there's a lot of Catholics that support abortion, even though the Church repeatedly says that Catholics should not support abortion. And in fact, if you are getting abortions, you're automatically excommunicated. So what people do and what they listen to is not necessarily the responsibility of the Church. The Church has always fought against slavery and said that it's wrong, that there's the dignity of the human person. But no matter what, people are going to continue to do wrong things. So in closing, look, the Bible does not support slavery. The ancient Israelites were slaves. But you have to understand there is a progression of God's revelation. And at the beginning, the Israelites were doing a lot of things that probably wouldn't be done. By the time that Christ comes, though, things have evolved. And certainly, as you see Christianity become legalized, in the 4th century AD. And then once there's a Christendom, slavery is essentially abolished. Yes, there's serfdom, but serfdom is not slavery. Chattel slavery is largely abolished. And then when we started doing the transatlantic slave trade in the 1430s, immediately, Pope Eugenius, 10 years later, is condemning it. Otherwise, guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.